Hello and welcome to my channel, I Win to Lose Gaming. Neuvillette has been confirmed to return in the second half of version 5.2, so it's about time we pump out an updated ultimate guide for one of the GOATs of Genshin Impact. This is Neuvillette. On-field carry, 40,000 HP, 250% crit damage, extra 36% crit rate from Marichasi, unstoppable, penetrates shields, can self-heal, insane AoE, brain dead single target, spin to win, can solo abyss, versatile teams, and free-to-play friendly. Not only is this copy pasta still applicable even to today, since then he has been buffed multiple times thanks to Natlan. As such, we're going to go through everything updated, as well as the stuff that you need to know anyway, that you need to know about Neuvillette, including his full kit, artifacts, weapons, constellation/investment priority, teams, and finally, my opinion and hot takes on Neuvillette, which might actually surprise you. And you're watching this video because you like waifus with guns. Well, I've got the perfect game for you. Ashe Echoes Global. Ashe Echoes Global is an incredibly stylish, grid-based, real-time tactics, tower defense, hero collector with elemental reactions strategy game. Seriously, not only are this game's waifus top tier, even the husbandos, which are plentiful, look incredible. With your local hell portal traversing delivery man, and with my personal favorite character, Xiangling at home. Ashe Echoes Global's story really caught me by surprise, as I usually mash that skip button like I'm practicing Morse code but only know how to say nope. But you're actually thrown into a post-apocalyptic future where you battle with your robot companions against legions of gooey monsters, implementing strategy and explosives to get the job done, then going back to current day to perhaps try to change the course of history. And Ashe Echoes Global does not hold back. Some characters' ultimates are practically an entire action scene. Yes, you're seeing that correctly. That's literally just one character's ultimate that's been playing in the background this whole time. Ashe Echoes Global's combat is a unique and one-of-a-kind experience, combining fast thinking, strategy, and even an elemental system where you can mix various elements to do terrible damage. And there are multiple game modes including story and even a roguelike mode. Not only that, but if you feel overwhelmed, let auto combat blow your enemies to smithereens on both mobile and PC. So if you like what you see, Ashe Echoes Global was recently released, so be sure to smash that link down below to check them out. Huge thanks to Ashe Echoes Global for sponsoring today's video. Why did I keep my intro pretty short? Because as usual with these ultimate guides, it's got a lot of information, so let's just get right into it. Neuvillette is a charge attack laser spamming main DPS character that can be used as an on-field Hydra driver or just as the hyper carry that he is so well suited for. We're going to talk about each individual aspect of his kit, starting with his normal attacks. Normal attacks, you can see that these hits here, they scale off of attack percent. He'll do a 3-hit combo, as well as if you do a charge attack and you release it quickly without any blue balls around him, then the charge attack will just shoot a little beam or whatever that really doesn't do a whole lot of damage. Now, as for his super charge attack, the charge attack Equitable Judgment, this is when you press and hold the left mouse button and he will basically fire a giant laser at his opponents, doing damage based on his max HP. This laser can tick up to 8 times against a single target, and if done just like this without any blue balls to absorb, then it will take him an entire 7 seconds total to fire out his charge shot. However, if you do have 3 of the source water droplets, or I'm just going to be calling them blue balls because source water droplets is quite the mouthful, but if you have 3 blue balls around him, he will absorb those blue balls and fire his laser much more quickly. Now, the laser attack does not drain stamina unlike most charge attacks. However, it does drain his max HP. He will lose 8% of his max HP every 0.5 seconds. And every blue ball that he absorbs with his charge attack will heal him for 16% of his max HP. Since you can absorb 3 of them at once, this means that he can heal for 48% of his max HP per charged attack. Now, how do we get the blue balls for Neuvillette? Why, we can use his elemental skill, which is otherwise quite unremarkable. However, it does generate 3 blue balls for his charge attack to absorb and quickly fire his laser. And we can see here that it also does a Spirit Breath Thorn. The Spirit Breath Thorn in this case will do Pneuma aligned Hydro damage, which is good against enemies that have mechanics that are countered by Pneuma type damage. And finally, we can see that his blue balls last for 15 seconds on field. I don't believe that there is a limit to how many blue balls can be on the field, but perhaps there is. I just never hit it personally. Finally, his elemental skill generates 3 to 4 hydro particles. Up next is his elemental burst, which does a bunch of damage based on his max HP, as well as 2 follow-up waterfall ticks, and the cooldown 18 seconds, 70 energy cost. The reason why you want to use this though is to generate 6 of his blue balls. So, as we can see, his kit heavily revolves around generating blue balls, and then using those blue balls to make his laser cannon fire pretty much instantly. Up next, we have his first passive, which has this little icon. This icon will be important, and I will show you guys in a little bit. But basically, if you trigger any hydro-related reaction, whether it's Vaporize, Frozen, Electric Charge, Bloom, Hydro Swirl, or Hydro Crystallize, so literally hydro plus any other element, then he will gain 1 stack of past Draconic Glories, and it will increase his charge attack damage by 110, 125%, and 160% accordingly, depending on how many Hydro-related reactions you've triggered. Any character in the team can trigger a reaction and it will add a stack. And finally, triggering Vaporize twice will only add 1 stack. Same with any of the other reactions. You have to trigger 3 separate reactions, then you will be able to get all 3 stacks. Why is it important to get all 3 stacks? This is its own separate multiplier. For those of you that are familiar, it works very similarly to Yoimiya's elemental skill. The next passive is this one, passive 2, which adds up to 30% hydro damage depending on Neuvillette's current HP. And this basically caps at when Neuvillette is at 80% of his max HP, he will gain 30% maximum hydro damage bonus. Now keep in mind that because his laser drains his HP by 8% per 0.5 seconds, after about 1.5 seconds or so, the ticks after that will do slightly less damage because of this passive going down. Finally, we have his last passive, which increases his underwater sprint speed by 15%. So for Neuvillette's talent priority, you definitely want to level up his normal attack as much as possible, followed by his ultimate, and you can get to his skill eventually. This part makes up the least out of his damage output. Let's talk about some visual tips and techs for Neuvillette. So the first thing is his first passive. How do we know how many stacks of Draconic Glories that he has? We can see here that there is this little icon that appeared above his head with a single ring right there. And we can see if we proc freeze, a second ring appears. And finally, if we activate Electro Charged, 3 rings appear above the active character, and we swap Neuvillette on, we can see that those 3 rings have appeared. And one other cool visual indicator is that Neuvillette's hair, as well as clothes tail thing, glow when he has 3 stacks of the Draconic, whatever it's called. We can see that it switched there to 2 stacks. He lost his glowing hair and tail thing. Now, the next tech that I want to talk about is his charge attack animation cancel. So basically, if you press and hold his left click, he'll charge for about half a second or 30 frames before shooting his laser. But if you press and hold and release, he will immediately fire his laser right after it detects that you've done a charge attack and you release the left click. So if we have it side by side, we can see that you can save roughly 30 frames on his charge attack animation by doing a quick click and hold release versus just clicking and holding the entire time. Just one other small optimization to take into consideration. And finally, we have the last tech, which I covered in much more detail, which is called the spin to win tech, where if you have a mouse with high DPI, you can spin to win, and you will generally do about 75% of his damage. We're going to talk about his artifacts next. For Neuvillette, obviously the 4-piece Marichachi Hunter is clearly designed for a character like Neuvillette, and he will gain the 3 stacks very, very quickly due to the way that his kit works. And at 3 stacks, this means that you will gain 36% crit rate, which is massive, as well as the 2-piece set bonus, which provides 15% charge attack damage. With this in mind, he will do about 31% additional damage in comparison to having no set bonus equipped at all, which is a massive boost to his charge attack damage. Now, his charge attack is the most important part of his kit that we do want to keep an eye on, but I did include his elemental burst damage calculation here as well. And one more important note about the Marichaci Hunter is you want to keep an eye on your Neuvillette's crit rate, because you could very well over crit, which means you have more than 100% crit rate, at which point that becomes completely useless. So 100% crit rate minus 36 is 64% crit rate. You don't want to go above 64% crit rate with Neuvillette, otherwise you will be wasting those stats. So do keep that in mind, and also keep in mind that you'll often have crit abyss cards, so sometimes for some abysses you can get away with a little less crit rate due to the abyss cards. The next best artifact set though is the 4-piece Heart of Depth. Fortunately, you will have very good uptime overall with his elemental skill usage on the charge attack, but we can see here that it's still doing substantially less damage than the 4-piece Marichaci Hunter. After that, you have 2-piece set combinations. Overall, most of the 2-piece set combinations will perform similarly to this. It does increase his damage all around, all across the board, 16% for both his charge attack and Q ratio, and you have more HP, which is nice for survivability, I guess. So yeah, not a terrible option if you have some pretty good 2-piece set combinations. Then we have a couple stopgap artifact sets that are usable in the meantime, which is the 4-piece Retracing Bolide, and finally the 4-piece Wanderer's Troop is an okay one to use as you're farming the 4-piece Marichaci Hunter. For stats and stuff, since Neuvillette scales off of his HP, it's the usual HP percent timepiece, Hydro or HP percent goblet, and crit circlet. Between crit rate or crit damage, it's whichever one helps you maintain the golden 1-to-2 crit ratio. And also don't forget to add the 36% crit rate from the Marichaci Hunter as well. As for the goblet, the main time you use an HP percent goblet is when he has a lot of damage percent bonuses. Like for example with Furina and perhaps Kazuha, this is where an HP percent goblet is usually roughly competitive to a Hydro damage goblet. And if you throw in more damage bonuses like Shilinin, then, well, an HP percent goblet will be even better. Now, if you're severely lacking on the above sources of bonus damage, overall the Hydro damage goblet is a bit better. Now for substats, it's the usual crit, greater than or equal to HP percent, greater than energy recharge, greater than flat HP. Now energy recharge is a bit tricky, but since nowadays pretty much everyone runs Neuvillette with Furina, this means that his energy requirements drop significantly thanks to Furina's off-field particle generation. If you're using a weapon that also provides energy, like the prototype Amber or his signature weapon, then even around 115 to 120% energy recharge should comfortably get you your burst when you need it. However, if you're using a weapon without energy recharge, like for example the Sacrificial Jade, and without a second Hydro character like Furina, I highly recommend some other energy funneling methods like Favonius on that team, because otherwise you're looking at around 170% energy recharge, which is extremely impractical. So yeah, that's why energy recharge weapons tend to rate a bit higher when it comes to the upcoming weapon rankings. But as always, energy is a moving goalpost, so try to experiment a bit and figure out what your team needs in terms of energy recharge. Up next, we have Neuvillette's weapons. Now, Neuvillette does have multiple new weapons that he can use that were newly introduced, but fortunately for me, from a guide making perspective, most of them are not really weapons that he should use. His best in slot option is unsurprisingly his signature weapon, the Tome of the Eternal Flow, and it still outperforms his best free-to-play friendly options by around a whopping 42%, which is a massive amount for a signature weapon. Overall though, his next best option is a highly refined Battle Pass weapon, the Sacrificial Jade, but you do need to keep an eye on 3 additional variables while using this weapon. You want to do shorter rotations if possible, because if you stay on field for too long you get punished with this weapon. You want to make sure you don't over crit with this thing, because this thing also has crit rate as a substat, and you'll probably want a Favonius user or 2 as teammates, and or more energy recharge substats, since this thing doesn't have any energy recharge. Still, if you're able to overcome all these issues, then the Sacrificial Jade's damage is somewhat competitive to his signature weapon. Now, after a highly refined Sacrificial Jade, the next best options are Milani's signature weapon, Surf's Up, and Risley's signature weapon, Cash Flow Supervision. These two are effectively just reasonable stat sticks, and while they might do around 88% of the damage that signature weapon does, they don't provide any energy to Neuvillette, which we've gone over a few times already, and I forgot if I mentioned this or not, but as Tome of the Eternal Flow also provides Neuvillette a significant amount of energy. And finally, for free-to-play players, his best options are the Prototype Amber and the event weapon, the Ballad of the Boundless Blue. Honestly though, between these two, I would just use the Prototype Amber because it also heals you and your team a bit, because otherwise they're extremely similar in performance. Alright, so while making this video, we did get some information on the upcoming Wave Riding World Catalyst, which should be a new catalyst coming in one of the weapon banners or something. Which weapon banner, I'm not entirely sure. But the nice thing about this catalyst is that it actually gives 15% swimming stamina consumption reduction. That's why everyone's going to be pulling for this. I just know it. But okay, for real, after you use your elemental skill, you get max HP is increased by 20%, and for every Hydro Element type character on your party, max HP is increased by another 12%, and the maximum increase that can be achieved this way is 24%, so if you have 2 Hydro characters on your party, then you will be able to get up to 44% HP percent, which is right here, as we can see, and it's a pretty solid catalyst at 78% performance, which is already better than the Prototype Amber, as well as having a massive 61.25% energy recharge stat. And if you actually happen to have his Constellation 1 in particular, so you can use him with Furina to maximize this weapon's passive, then this is going to be a really solid option. And at Refinement 5 though, this thing becomes, you know, actually a pretty stellar option at 83% of the Tome of the Eternal Flow. But yeah, and also here's the full chart of the rest of the weapons I didn't necessarily talk about, but feel free to take a look at them in terms of their issues and pros and cons and whatever. Now the team section is where things have really evolved for Neuvillette. When he was released, Furina wasn't even out yet, and Baizhu was barely a character. And well, let's not even mention everything that came with Natlan. Now the reality is everyone and their mothers have been running Neuvillette, Furina, Kazuha, and Baizhu. This team has been dumpstering and dominating Abyss usage rates for very many patches now. However, now Neuvillette has some non-copium alternatives and even an upgrade. Now before continuing, I don't cover leaks on my channel, but we do have enough information about Auroron from the livestream to assume that he will be a very competent Scroll of the Hero of Cinder City user thanks to being from Natlan, going into Night Soul state, and applying Electro. So yeah, no leaks, but we are making some assumptions about Auroron. Now in particular, for players that don't have those 5 stars mentioned earlier, or you want to use those 5 stars on the other team, we actually now have some somewhat competitive 4-star options. Thanks to the release of Natlan characters and the 4-piece Scroll of Cinder City, both Kachina and Auroron are viable choices to support a low-budget Neuvillette. In particular, I really like Cinder City Kachina because she can generate a Crystallize, which allows your final support character to equip the Archaic Petra and grab the crystal for another 35% Hydro damage. This is a total of 75% Hydro damage, which is actually equivalent to Furina's damage buff. For example, this 4-star budget team of Sucrose, Kachina, and an Archaic Petra holder, like for example Kuki to provide some additional healing, can have Neuvillette do very similar amounts of damage as the traditional Neuvillette plus Furina plus Kazuha plus Baizhu team, which is incredibly impressive. Of course, the Furina variant is still, in my opinion, much better since Furina does a lot more damage and Kazuha does damage, as well as some free blooms and free shields from Baizhu, etc, etc. But even floating the idea that a free-to-play variation can have Neuvillette deal roughly the same amount of damage as a fully stacked 5-star team is pretty impressive. But that's not all, because now Shilinen exists as well and serves as a very reasonable replacement for Baizhu, since she heals a reasonable amount for Furina, and now Neuvillette's damage just skyrockets even higher than before. So yeah, now he has a free-to-play friendly team that is somewhat but not fully competitive to his old best team, and he now has a new best team thanks to the release of Shilinen. Now another speculative team includes Auroron, who should be an interesting teammate because he can also use the Cinder City, freeing up your final slot for an Archaic Shielder like Zhongli, for example, for ultimate comfort. Although this team doesn't have a healer, but the Prototype Amber is probably enough with a thick shield from Zhongli and the Prototype Amber healing from Neuvillette. Now, of course, we can go all the way back to when Neuvillette was released and just literally throw on random teammates like Diona, Lisa, Goro to fulfill his 3 Draconic Glory stacks at Constellation 0 Neuvillette. And you can even play some funky vape teams and hyperbloom teams, but overall, I personally recommend focusing on maximizing Neuvillette's personal damage, especially in today's economy with the extremely accessible Scroll of the Hero of Cinder City. Now there are a few more interesting questions, like will the Pyro Archon provide buffs as well? Could she also be a good teammate for Neuvillette? Only time will tell, but for now, Neuvillette has already been one of the biggest winners of the recent Natlan characters that have been released. Now this section is for all you recent Dogecoin hodlers, Neuvillette's constellations and investment priority. And since this is the part of the video with the worst retention, here's Neuvillette elegantly sipping his water. A common debate is whether you should get Constellation 1 or his signature weapon. His Constellation 1 makes it so he can get all 3 Draconic Glory stacks, even with another Hydro character, and it also provides him super armor. And as we can see in this chart, Constellation 1 Prototype Amber Neuvillette plus Furina is pretty close in damage to Constellation 0 Refinement 1 Tome of the Eternal Flow Neuvillette plus Furina. As such, I tend to recommend Constellation 1 because it also adds perfect super armor on top of dealing roughly the same amount of damage if you do run him with Furina, which is really nice for him. Now the full Constellations chart doesn't fully take into account his Constellation 1 properly, which is why I showed you what happens when you add Furina as well. Anyway, Constellation 2 offers 42% crit damage to his laser, Constellation 3 gives 3 levels to his charge attack. Both of these are incredible constellations for him, increasing his laser damage substantially. His Constellation 4, however, on its own, is admittingly not that great, generating an extra blue ball once every 4 seconds. However, it becomes extremely good with his Constellation 6, which we'll get to in a moment. His Constellation 5 adds 3 levels to his burst, which is not great, but his Constellation 6, oh my goodness, you've probably seen it if you've watched any of my videos because I use Neuvillette all the time, but it's insane. He can basically blast his cannon for way longer and for way harder. Basically, he'll keep pumping his enemies full of his fluids as long as there are any nearby source water droplets. By Constellation 6 Refinement 5, Neuvillette was one of the fastest speedrunners, and even to this day, he is still one of the better speedrunning characters, especially for awkward spawn locations for enemies. So yeah, if you can't tell, Neuvillette is still one of the best characters in Genshin Impact, and it's really hard to go wrong with him. Admittingly, while other characters like Milani and Arlecchino overall do more DPS, Neuvillette is extraordinarily easy to use and has massive radial AoE, where he still outperforms characters that might have higher DPS than him, and he is completely Unga Boonga and requires no complex reactions. Now another thing I might have forgotten to mention earlier is that Neuvillette is also very flexible with his rotations, as his damage currency is blue balls on the floor, which linger for a long time. This allows him to swap on and off as needed in between laser cannon blasts, thus further adding to his flexibility and power. Now it is true that new DPS characters are getting stronger and stronger, but fortunately Neuvillette has been benefiting up to this point from some of the power creep, especially with the new supports that have been coming out. And of course he has a lot of potential vertical investment as well, whether you invest into Neuvillette or his teammates like Shilinin. Let me know what you think about Neuvillette in today's meta. Personally, I think he's still an absolute beast, although I gotta be 100% honest, if you don't have enough for both Neuvillette and Mavuika, I would wait to see if Mavuika is coming soon in version 5.3, because if I had to guess, she's probably coming in version 5.3, and if she's coming, to see what she can do before pulling for Neuvillette. Since Neuvillette is coming in the second half of version 5.2, this means, assuming that Mavuika comes in 5.3, the preview for her kit will also come while Neuvillette's banner is still active, and as such, we should have a decent idea of what the Pyro Archon can do as well. Of course, you should always pull for who you like, and if you like Neuvillette, well, you won't be disappointed. Also, huge thanks to Ash Echoes Global for sponsoring today's video. Be sure to check them out down in the description below. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. This is I Went to Lose, signing out.